Recording. Good evening, everyone. Kalispera σας. It is a great pleasure to be introducing Rob Troyer, fellow linguist, professor of linguistics at Western Oregon University. His teaching and research is focused on social linguistics, second language acquisition, language teaching and learning, and corpus linguistics. His publications are primarily in the field of linguistic landscapes, and his web-based resources for scholars are used widely by researchers in the field. Rob will be talking to us tonight about linguistic landscape studies as a reflection of multilingualism in the US. A warm welcome, Robert. Thank you for accepting this invitation for what is a pretty late talk for us, but thank God, and not very late talk for you back in Oregon. You have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Kanakis. And thank you for inviting me. I want to take just a minute at the beginning to say my first time ever leaving the United States was a trip to Greece when I actually turned 25 years old during my 3-week backpacking trip around Greece. And so that was almost 30 years ago. And at that time, there was, I presume, less, I haven't been back since, but less English around, English language written in Greece at that time. So before I went, I learned to read the Greek alphabet so that I could get around by myself while I was backpacking. And I presume a traveler may not need to do that as much today with more English in the environment, for better or worse. But so I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm happy to be here and presenting to your group. So let's see, make sure my PowerPoint's working. Yeah. You've had several presentations, it looks like, already related to linguistic landscapes. So I won't spend a lot of time reviewing that. And I'll also talk about some of the background of what I'm looking at. So the linguistic landscape bibliography that I've put together, looking at LL studies globally, but then focusing on this research in the United States. Just as a beginning point, many of us are familiar with the Landry and Boris definition of the linguistic landscape as the visibility and salience of languages on public and commercial signages. And then, the list of road signs, advertising, billboards, et cetera. So I went to Google Maps, and I did find some street view pictures. I believe they were 2019, just down the road from your university. And so you can see, there's bilingual signage with Greek and English and some graffiti, which I don't know, I would guess that it maybe is not there today, but I'm not sure what the graffiti refers to. Maybe in the question and answer period, you can enlighten me. And then a picture of just downtown in your city, where we can see, large international companies using English along with Greek and various other signs. There are other definitions of the linguistic landscape. Gorder and Sonoa's their recent publication just last year, a panorama of linguistic landscape studies, does a really good job of outlining some of the history and some of the different definitions. So the configuration of language choices in public signage, the symbolic construction of public spaces, geospatially situated domains, and then the very general, the use of language in its written form in the public sphere. And I very much think that we need to include online landscapes. So your university's website is mostly in Greek, but you can see the Discover Your Wings is prominent, and there's a button to translate to English up there. Also looking at, educational spaces is something that I'm very much interested in. This bottom picture is from research that I did with international students at our institution, where we had some multilingual signage. And so I interviewed them about their thoughts about seeing their language. And so here's a student from China commenting on a banner that has Mandarin written on it. So the Linguistic Landscape Bibliography is a project that I've been working on for over a decade. And it started when I was working on a paper in 2010 and 2012. And I realized that, I wanted to list a big bibliography of linguistic landscape studies, which at that point was around 100 publications. And so I put them together and I made a simple website, and it's grown over the years. And so now it's hosted on Zotero. Dirk Gorder and I collaborate on its some. So you can see the owner is Dirk Gorder. He admits new members, but I generally do most of the uploading of new resources. And the reason this is helpful to linguistic landscape scholars is that the term linguistic landscape means a lot of things. It can be used simply to mean the discourse that's being used in an area, or the languages used in a geographical region or a country, or just the general trends that people are talking about. So if you're doing linguistic landscape research and you want to find references, you have to sort through all of the false hits that are referring to linguistic landscape in just a very general sense, not in our academic field. So what I do is I get rid of all that stuff, and I focus on just linguistic landscape research. So if you, I also have, I should say, on our university's website, I have a linguistic landscape resources page. So there's a link to the bibliography, information about it, how to access it, a linguistic landscape corpus, which is a collection of full texts that are searchable. You can't download them, but you can search them and get chunks for corpus research. And then some work that I've been doing in the last couple of years on linguistic landscapes and Spanish on campuses in the United States. And here's just a couple of comments on the bibliography. I highly recommend that people become a member, because if, for example, you're interested in like this group, maybe ethnographic approaches, if I'm looking at this is the web-based version of the bibliography, which you can get to on Zotero, which is free and anyone can access. If I type in, oops, it's the E. If I type in ethnograph, which will catch ethnographic and ethnographies, I'll get about 20 hits. And there's Costas's article. But if you become a member and you download the Zotero desktop app, then you get access to the group library there. You can search not only the titles, but also all of the abstracts. So if I type in the same word, I will see 133 entries. So I highly recommend that people become a member of the Zotero Linguistic Landscape group, download the desktop version, and then you can search all of the abstracts for the references. All right. And you can get to the bibliography pretty easily through a Google search. So in the bibliography, I have folders for everything, any publication, journal articles, book chapters, books, theses, and dissertations. They're all categorized here. You can search by section, but I also have it organized by location. So any article that has data from a specific geographical location gets put into a folder by geographic region and then country. And so if I click on Europe and Greece, there are about 5 articles, 5 publications, 3 journal articles, and a dissertation that have linguistic landscape research published in Greece. And I should say that these are mostly English publications. I do have some records, some references to linguistic landscape work that's published in other languages, but I generally don't have time with one research assistant to seek out a lot of that. However, if you have linguistic landscape work that is published in another language, you can send me the references, and I am happy to add that to the bibliography. So what you see here is it'll give you a sense of the linguistic landscape work that has been done globally over the last 25 years. And, you can see if we look at regions, there's definitely the United States has had more publications of linguistic landscape work than any other country. But we see also a lot in Europe, quite a lot in East Asia. In Africa, there have been about 100, over 130 publications, but about 50 of them are from South Africa, where there's a very strong research component at some of the South African universities. So again, this right now the bibliography contains almost 1,500 references, and not all of them are tagged for a location because they don't all have location-based data. But for those that are, they're here. And again, this is mostly English publications, so it's a bit skewed in that sense. But this does give you a sense of the global study reach of linguistic landscape research in all of these countries, where often there's just one or two studies in the countries that are in the reddest color. So what I'm looking at, so about a year ago, I was invited by Dirk Gorder and Isone Sinoes to work on a chapter for their upcoming handbook of linguistic landscapes and multilingualism. So I started working on a review of the linguistic landscape work that's been done in the United States, and in order to look at it as a reflection of multilingualism. So what I'm presenting today is directly from the book chapter that I've been working on. I submitted it last December, and I just recently got reviews back. And so what you're seeing today is based on revisions that I've made following some of the reviewers. And I hope that at the end, if we have some discussion, some of that might help me think about some of the conclusions that I want to include in the chapter. So what I'm looking at is
Sí, claro. ¿No quieres que te lo haga?
What I'm looking at is these 125.
Sorry to interrupt. I would like to
Yes.
ask everyone to turn off their microphones, to mute themselves. I keep hearing interference. Sorry about that. Sorry, Rob.
No, that's okay. We all taught through COVID. We're familiar with the Zoom issues. So what I'm looking at are the 125 linguistic landscape publications from within the United States context, and this will give you a sense of these studies, how they've appeared over time. So going back to 2002 was the first couple of studies, or first study that was done in the US with a linguistic landscape approach, and definitely increases over the years. I will say that for 2022 and 23, I do have a little bit of a backlog of articles I still need to enter. So these numbers could go up a little bit, but definitely we can see the tremendous growth in the field. And if we break this down by the types of publications, we can see that journal articles are the most common, and we've seen growth over from 2015, 16, 17, 18, 20, and then in 2021, not many journal articles published on linguistic landscapes in the United States. I suspect that might be due to some COVID, decrease due to COVID. Researchers not being out collecting so much data, but it came back up in 22, and you can see that in 2023, I think there were two collections that were edited collections with several chapters on linguistic landscape studies in the United States. And we can also see, so there have been 3 monographs, 2011, 2016, and 2020. The 2021, which I highly recommend, is especially if you're into ethnography, is this one, Trench and Snodger, and who have written a lot of things. It's a study of gentrification in Brooklyn, and it's a decade-long ethnographic study of Brooklyn and changes in the role of the linguistic landscape. So if we look at the geographical distribution of these studies, whenever data was collected in a specific location, I documented that, and then I just quantified it. So we can see that most of the linguistic landscape research in the United States has been in New York, and the way the mapping or the way the graphing program renders it, it looks like it's all of New York, but really those 25 studies, I think almost all of them, except maybe one or two, are in New York City. So it really should just be one little black dot here where my arrow is. And then likewise in California, the vast majority of those studies are Los Angeles and San Francisco and Southern California. But what you can see is there's definitely, a distribution. And in terms of how do these studies of linguistic landscapes in the United States reflect multilingualism, we can compare to a map of languages other than English that are spoken in the United States. So this is data from the U.S. Census and the community surveys. And we can see that California and New York have the highest percentage of speakers of other languages, with Texas and Florida and New Mexico following close behind, New Jersey, and then other states. And these darkest colored states, this is about 35 to 44% of the population who are over the age of 5 speak a language other than English. And so you can see that along the East Coast and the West Coast and the southern border are the highest percentages. And then we have kind of the monolingual English section of the United States here in the Midwest and the North. And if we look at these side by side, we can definitely see a connection. This is on the left-hand side, studies of the linguistic landscape, and on the right-hand side, multilingualism, or the presence of languages other than English. And so you can definitely see a connection here. But there are other factors to consider. Population density, of course. New York and California and Texas and Florida are the most populous states in the U.S. They're also places where a lot of immigrants arrive. And so they have a lot of linguistic diversity for that fact. And that means that linguistic landscape studies are more likely to be done in these places of high linguistic diversity. I should also say that the presence of researchers. There's not that many of us who are doing linguistic landscape research in the United States, and our particular concerns can shape what's being studied. So for example, if we look at the map of other languages, we see that Washington has more people who speak additional languages than Oregon, and yet Oregon has 2 studies because those are both by me, and I'm studying my local landscape. So we can't, we have to consider some other factors. So I was interested in looking at the languages that are addressed in all of these. It's actually about 123 articles that I reviewed for this overview, and I wanted to look at languages, and so I classified articles according to the prominent language that was being studied, and so you can see that in 25 of the articles, English was the primary language being studied in the landscape. There were 2 articles that were specifically focused on regional varieties of English and how those are present in the landscape. For example, Hawaiian Creole English in Hawaii. And then I labeled 10 of them as English Plus, meaning the primary focus of the data gathering was on English, but there were other languages that were in the landscape that were documented. On the other hand, there were almost as many articles, 35 articles, where the focus was on Spanish and looking at the role that Spanish plays in the linguistic landscape in the United States. And so even more studies focusing specifically on Spanish than, predominantly English. And then Spanish plus other languages that were there, a few more. And I think this is a really good reflection of, or an accurate reflection of, the linguistic situation in the United States, where Spanish is by far the most common second language in the U.S. right now, actually, the United States is the second most populous Spanish-speaking country in the world. Only Mexico has more Spanish speakers than the United States. We have slightly more than Colombia, and that's far more even than in Spain. So the presence of Spanish in linguistic landscape studies is a reflection of the multilingual aspect of the U.S. But also, if we look at the other languages, 11 studies were focused really specifically on Chinese, Korean, the indigenous languages in the US, documenting the role of German in certain linguistic landscapes, Russian, Arabic, and then studies that looked at less commonly used languages, I should say less commonly seen languages, Amharic, ASL, French, Hebrew, Indian, Japanese, Indian, very broad term there for Indian languages, Japanese, Khmer, Portuguese, Thai, and Turkish. So, this combination, along with 11 studies that I categorized as multiple LOTs. I'm not a big fan of the acronym LOT, but it refers to languages other than English. So 11 studies they were documenting a specific location, and there was no particular emphasis given to one language or another. They were documenting multiple languages in a very multilingual situation. And so, like I said, as a whole, I think this is a really good reflection of multilingualism in the United States, at least in the kind of urban environments that have been researched by linguistic landscape scholars. As I was working on, trying to find an approach to this body of work in the United States, I was contemplating different ways of framing and organizing the studies. And I should point out, here is Gorder and Sanoa's recent publication, which I think is open source. You should be able to access it online, Panorama of Linguistic Landscape Studies. And they have a chapter 3 addresses theoretical approaches. And so it kind of goes to the development of linguistic landscape studies, and from ethnolinguistic vitality type of studies through different frameworks that have been used, and then research methods. So there's a lot of ways that we could look at this body of work and break it down, like according to research methods or according to theoretical approaches. But I wanted to focus on something a little bit different, and so that's what I call situatedness. So if you look at what's been published in the field of linguistic landscape studies, most of it is situated in a very specific context, and some of it is not. So what I mean by that, what I mean by that is that the degree to which a given publication focuses on and is grounded in empirical data collected from a specific geographical location. And then, from there, I broke these studies down into the different kinds of contexts or orientations toward different contexts. So let me explain a little bit. The largest category of studies, again, we're dealing with about 123 publications. The largest category is what I would refer to as urban multilingualism. And this is what Patikkanen called the Main Street approaches to linguistic landscape studies, who I think Patikkanen presented here a few months ago. And that's the for lack of a better word, a traditional approach to linguistic landscape studies, where you go into a public space and you document all of the signage that's visible from, say, the sidewalk to a passerby. And again, that is I think we can legitimately call that a traditional kind of linguistic landscape study, because there are more of those than there were anything else in this collection of articles and publications. After that, I was a bit more interested in particular spaces and functions, where there was where the linguistic landscape researcher was addressing a very specific context within a larger geographical area. One of the really growing areas in the last 6 years, 5 or 6 years in linguistic landscape studies has been schoolscape studies. And that's, one of my articles is in this category. So I studied the 5 schools in the local school district, 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and high school. And all of the linguistic landscape research was on the school campus, around the buildings and inside the hallways and the public areas where, a parent or another community member may have access to. And so there are 11 studies in the US dealing with schoolscapes, very growing area. 3 studies dealing with cemeteries or memorials. I believe Robert Blackwood was here last month and talked about memorials. So we have a few of those kind of studies in the US. But then some other studies that reflect issues in the United States, like immigration. So there's one study of an immigration office and a city where there are a lot of recent refugees relocating. And I think this speaks to the real functional application of linguistic landscape studies to improve people's lives. We need to make sure that immigration offices and refugee cities have signage that is accessible for people who have limited English and signs that are in the languages that they know. Some other specific spaces and functions, artscapes, 3 studies of, and then in the more commercial domain, billboards, and then in the more of the residential domain, college house signs, some interesting work by Ledusa on college students' signs on the houses they rent, rural yard signs, security signs, and then again more of the commercial malls, chain stores, restaurants, and there's even a study of restrooms or latrinalia on university campuses. And so again, that's that's a study it's almost all focused on English. It's not really multilingual, but it's looking at gendered discourse in gendered restrooms in universities and the kind of messages that are posted in that specific space and function. Along with what I would call events and processes, there are 2 sets of publications. One set focused on gentrification, and again, the Trintz and Snodger and Trench. This is one book, and I think they have about, out of these 9 publications, I think 5 of them are from these 2 researchers, focusing on the gentrification practices and the role that and how this is seen, the effects of gentrification are seen in the linguistic landscape. But also political demonstrations. Hanauer and Seals have several articles based in the United States covering political demonstrations and the role that linguistic landscapes play in them. I also I saw in looking at all of these articles that some of them were very much focused on not so much a specific space or a specific event, but on a language or a variety. And so there were 3 articles that were really focused on documenting indigenous languages in the United States, like Navajo, and their presence in the linguistic landscape and the importance. Regional Englishes, which I mentioned, dialects of English that are local to a specific area. Some articles focusing on script semiotics, so the presence of Chinese characters on signage. Sign languages, an article that hopefully I can talk about later, about the role of ASL, American Sign Language, and sign languages in general, needing to be included in studies of the linguistic landscape, and then focus on heritage languages. Another category that I call discourses focuses on collecting data related to specific discourses. So, for example, COVID signage, there were a couple of studies that look specifically at the role that COVID signs played in the recent pandemic. Social media scape work, a couple of studies that looked at, it's very interesting and I think an important development in linguistic landscape studies, looking at how images, like when people have their phone and they take a picture of a linguistic landscape and then they upload it to Instagram or Twitter and they make some kind of comment about it. And so that linguistic landscape, it gets re-semiotized into a digital form and then becomes part of the the digital media sphere. And I think the intersection between the physical landscape and what we do online is a very important part of this whole field that needs to develop. A couple of studies in terms of discourses on language policies and panhandling and homelessness and the LGBTQ issues, which there's a few of those, but other examples of specific discourses. I'm going to jump up here. There are 11 studies of these 123 that I classified as non-situated. What I mean by that is they don't have any data from a specific geographical location. And you might think, how can you have a linguistic landscape article with no data from a specific location? Well, two of those articles are methodological summaries. So just talking, Franco Rodriguez has a couple of book chapters and an article where he's talking about methodologies of doing linguistic landscape studies, and he gives examples, some drawn from the United States, California and Florida, and some drawn from Spain. But really, those are just exemplary. It's not a study of a specific location. So I would say that it's not situated in a specific environment. There's another study of indigenous languages where I would say it's a kind of on the outskirts of linguistic landscape studies, but it does address the role that the names of indigenous languages and tribes play in place marking. There are, I think, importantly, a few studies of perceptions and attitudes. And this goes back to the early research in linguistic landscapes by Landry and Boris, looking at ethnolinguistic vitality. And so the studies of these four are ones in which people were asked about the linguistic landscape. They were asked about their language ideologies. They were asked about their attitudes toward languages and about their attitudes and their perceptions of print in the environment. So even though data was not collected that visually, documents what you see in the landscape, you are asking people about the linguistic landscape. And I think there's actually an important role. We moved away from that. It's kind of where the field started over 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we've gone away from that. And I think that's a place we could come back to. And then 4 studies that are about using the linguistic landscape as a pedagogical tool, but with no specific application to a specific context. On the other hand, related to pedagogy, there were 15 articles, which are quite a lot, within this collection, of articles based on using the linguistic landscape for pedagogy. And the reason this is kind of somewhere in between being very situated in a specific context and being not situated is that these articles do include, and I find these some of the most interesting articles that I've read recently, they include what students did. Typically, these are university classrooms where professors had projects that had students go out into the local their local cities and document the linguistic landscape and study it as part of student projects. But in the articles themselves, the results of the students' data collection is presented, and so you get this wonderful combination of research that captures the local context, but shows you how to do the same thing as a teacher and use these linguistic landscape methodologies as a way to teach language awareness, to teach a second language, and to, in some cases, one of the articles was about, for example, a university course for prospective teachers in order to raise their awareness of the multilingual character of the students that they will be teaching. And so it was a requirement for this graduate course for prospective teachers for them to go out and do a linguistic landscape project and learn about the actual environment where their students are from and the different languages, because unfortunately in the United States, many people who go into teaching are monolingual English speakers, and they're not nearly as aware of the multilingualism that's out there in our communities as they should be, to be in line with where their students are coming from in terms of their linguistic resources. So I hope this this idea of the situatedness makes sense and is helpful for understanding the field of linguistic landscapes and where and the different possibilities, some of the possibilities, in addition to thinking of methodologies and theoretical frameworks. I do have a few recommendations. In going through, looking closely at these 125 or so references and articles, a few stood out, and this is pretty biased depending on my current interest. But Quran, it's the one I just talked about, preparing teachers and students to see, hear, and affirm our communities. I think is a very important step in linguistic landscape studies because it documents, it tells about a university course that requires prospective teachers to learn about the linguistic landscape. I think that's an important element of avenue for outreach for us as linguistic landscape scholars. Fisher et al., Unveiling Sign Languages in the Linguistic Landscape. This is the first article that I know of that documents signed languages in the linguistic landscape. And, and this has been, very difficult to do in the past because sign languages don't have a written alphabet, and so they don't often show up. But, I did notice, I saw on Twitter, on X, recently, a picture that was a few years old of a train station in England where they have, a monitor that shows a person signing. And so anybody who's using sign language can look up at the monitor and see the information, the timetables and everything explained in British Sign Language. And so if we're documenting language in the public space and we have video monitors that show somebody using a sign language, we as linguistic landscape researchers need to have ways of capturing these multimodal communications and accounting for them as languages in the environment. And this article is a very important first step. Lou, Martins, and Sayer, they're connecting demographic data on social class and multilingualism with research on the linguistic landscape. And I think that's, in some ways, that's going back to the origins of linguistic landscape research and looking at ethnolinguistic vitality. And I think we should have more of these kinds of studies that have some very practical policy kind of applications for linguistic landscapes. And then I mentioned political demonstrations. Seal's 2017 article about the linguistic landscape of mass scale events is an excellent article for looking at methodologies for capturing these kind of multimodal events, which are a very important area in linguistic landscape research. I will kind of self-servingly promote one of my articles. So this is a schoolscape study, Spatializing Language Studies, just came out last year, edited by Dobrel, Malinowski, and Maxim. And in here I'm looking at the agency and policy. And so what determines the linguistic landscape in a school? Who has the control? Is it the students who have multiple languages? Is it the teachers? To what degree do the teachers control what they put up in the hallways, and what kinds of control do the administrators have? You have district-wide administration, you have building administration. So there's a lot of intersections of agency and policy that we need to think about in terms of making our schools reflect the languages that are present in our students' lives. And then last, multilingual landscapes and telecollaboration. This was I think a very useful kind of study. It's about two groups of university students, one in New York who are advanced students of Spanish, connected with a group of English learners in, I believe it was Madrid. I know it was in Spain. And so the students in New York, they went out and they documented Spanish in New York, and they took pictures and they sent them to the students in Madrid. The students in Madrid who are studying English documented English in Madrid and sent those to the students in New York. And they had this wonderful collaboration between two groups of university students. And I think this is a very creative use of linguistic landscapes for language teaching and just cross-cultural communication and collaboration. So some conclusions. I hope that what I've presented here is you can find some applicability to other countries, for example, in Greece. Consider, looking back at the situatedness, consider the role of how are we situating a linguistic landscape study in a local context, and what are the possibilities? There are so many possibilities for discourses and spaces and events and varieties to look at that, like I said, that I hope that this is some inspiration for people in other countries to do more linguistic landscape research in additional ways. And then in terms of, looking maybe a more critical lens, what's missing? Where should we go in the future in terms of linguistic landscape research in the U.S. context? I think there should be more studies of rural contexts. So in my book chapter, I said that the studies in New York and California are a little unbalanced, overrepresentative. And one of the reviewers questioned that because they said, well, New York and California have the largest populations, they're more multilingual, it's not unbalanced. But in looking at the United States demographics, there are a lot more users of languages other than English that are spreading out throughout rural America. And I do think it's important for us to have more studies of rural contexts and looking at the linguistic landscape in not just large urban environments, but in everyday contexts for everyday Americans. I think we need more connections to societal language ideologies because linguistic intolerance is still an issue in the United States. And the more we can understand people's beliefs and attitudes towards languages and connect that to linguistic landscapes, I think that can lead to more pluralistic ideologies. Multilingualism in education, depending on where you are in the United States, chances are anywhere from 20 to 40% of students in the K through 12 system speak English as their second language. And we definitely need to be better in the United States at reflecting multilingualism and the different languages that our students come to us with and that they use outside of the school system. And last, I think we can do more to connect linguistic landscape research to policies and practical applications, like teaching and education, and just making signage available for people who use different languages at home. For example, just south of where I'm at the University of Oregon, one of my someone I know in the Spanish department had a grant to add more bilingual signage to some of the local city parks and areas in Eugene, Oregon. And I think we need more of those kind of collaborations that where linguistics and applied linguistics researchers are making more of an impact on our local environments. All right, that's what I have. Do you have? I'm happy to answer some questions or have some discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for this inspiring presentation. A lot of data and a lot of interesting categorizations for research within the US, but also outside the US. I find what you said about resemiotization in online environments to be very important. And it actually occurs to me that resemiotization also occurs whenever we publish research in printed form. I mean, given the crucial role of location in what we do, this could also be taken into consideration. It just occurred to me as you were talking about the role of semiotization in online environments, which are, of course, growing and becoming more and more relevant in everyone's everyday reality. Moreover, what you said about rural context seems to be a constant demand in the field that has been constantly articulated, but little served, to the best of my knowledge, internationally. No?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there are a few studies, but typically the LL studies are in large urban environments.
Right. And the ones that I have in mind are actually studies in suburban spaces in Africa that could actually count as rural, but not quite.
Right.
And this is what I have in mind. Whereas the pedagogy and schoolscape research seems to be on the boom internationally. There seems to be an interest in that respect, both as regards multilingualism, but also other aspects of schoolscapes, such as art installations, as we've seen, or choice of language. I mean, multilingualism, but choosing a language or actually attempting to ban a language, as we had a talk relayed to us last year by an Israeli colleague whose name I now forget. So all of that is, I believe, very relevant to what we do. I would like to open the floor to our audience for questions, remarks, comments. Please raise hands, or if you're made co-hosts, please use your microphones.
Hello, Costas. Hi, Robert. Thank you for your talk.
Hi, Solda.
I just want to add some names to those you mentioned, Costas, because in the large and fascinating international workshop that should be called Symposium in Madrid on linguistic landscapes, we got to see presentations on rural landscape. The most attractive one was one on seascape in Ireland, by a young woman whose Irish name and last name I'm unable to reproduce. But actually, that was not an exception, because people who are drawn to rural landscapes are also engaged in environmental issues. And as far as the focus on language ideologies, that's the most frequent, because those who explore ideologies are trained in observing details in the environment and in everyday practices that are not necessarily explicit, but give off meanings that are ideological. But of course, if the center of attention is the United States, the recent and high quality work by Gayle Modan and Jenny Lehman comes to mind in schools, bilingual schools in Mount Pleasant, a neighborhood of Washington, D.C. But actually, it would be neat to detect what is the theoretical frontier in the field, if it is a field, because we should probably be thinking of linguistic research as a type of data. Therefore, applied linguists in their field can take advantage of what linguistic landscape offers to them, while people involved in multilingualism can profit from other aspects of the same data. Those who are mainly discourse analysts or interactional social linguists will definitely not be interested in, for example, school children's collaboration with other school children. So should we be calling LL research a field? Probably not. I'm inclined to fall back onto the traditional disciplines definitions, definitions of subdisciplines and subfields. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there are many parallels between linguistic landscape studies and corpus studies. As you know, as corpus work has become more common, is corpus linguistics a field, or is corpus linguistics a method of gathering data that can be used, you know, in all kinds of areas? And I think there's a parallel development almost, you know, simultaneously in these two, you know, ways of gathering linguistic data. And you know, there are journals devoted to corpus linguistics, but you know, we can use the data in many different ways. And I think it's the same with linguistic landscapes. We have a journal devoted to it. There are books that are devoted to linguistic landscapes, but it's very interdisciplinary, and there's a lot of ways we can use it. Yeah, I agree that calling it a field may be a bit of a misnomer, but I'm not sure what else to call all of this stuff that we can group under linguistics. And it's a very amorphous kind of grouping. Definitely, when I'm looking at what to include in the bibliography, I go for inclusivity. So if something, you know, is taking if there's an element of studying or documenting the language, you know, in the physical environment, I generally include it, whether or not they use the term linguistic landscape. And of course, the bibliography is not completely comprehensive. There's always, I can't capture everything. But yeah, in general, I agree with you. It's not a cohesive field, for example, like the field of, you know, phonetics or, you know, semantics.
Well, thank you, Isolda. Thank you, Rob. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Is there any? Daphne Christoulaki. Yes, please, you have the floor.
Hi, good evening to everyone. I just wanted to say to Robert, thank you for the Zotero database. It's something that, I'm a PhD researcher. I'm doing my thesis right now. Kostas Kanakis is my supervisor. We're working on the linguistic landscape of Mytilene. And a database where you can search is very useful. And I will definitely be using this tool. This is something that we also tried to do for Greek researchers when we met in the linguistic landscape workshop. And I think it would be really useful for us. And I would also like to be in touch to talk about Greek texts on the linguistic landscape, because there are some more that were not included because they are, MA thesis or papers where the term linguistic landscape isn't explicitly used. And I think it would be a good addition for the database.
Oh yeah, and I'm always open if people have things that they think should be added, just send me references. The only thing that I ask is that we include abstracts. Abstracts are pretty easy to get with journal articles, but with book chapters, it's a little bit harder. And I like to have the abstracts there. It makes it more functional. But I'm happy to include anything that people send me.
Makes good sense. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Rob, it was a pleasure having you with us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your effort. And a big thanks to the audience for being with us tonight. And let me advertise the next talk. Isolda Carranza, who's here with us tonight from the National University of Cordoba in Argentina, will be talking to us next week, Tuesday night, 9 o'clock Greek time. Thank God, about 11 o'clock, I guess, AM Argentinian time. So have a good night, everyone, and see you next week.
Ευχαριστώ.
Παρακαλούμε, εμείς ευχαριστούμε.
Thank you.
Γεια σου, Γιώργο.
Bye bye.
Γεια σας. Bye.